and welcome to Inspiring You. I'm Sandra Pollock, so glad you've joined us again. Today my guest is Julian Harrison, and Julian was a former, or is, you should say, is a former lead officer for equality at Leicestershire County Council. Julian, welcome.
Thank you very much, Sandra. Glad to be here.
Julian, you're welcome. You're also an activist for mental health and an author of the book Suspended Disbelief, Reflections on the Holocaust.
That's right, yeah.
Yeah, so welcome, Julian.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Julian, an activist for mental health. How did you get involved in dealing with mental health?
Simply because of my own identity as someone with a mental illness.
Right.
I've had depression since childhood.
Mm-hmm.
I've had OCD as well, obsessive
Right.
compulsive disorder, and so I guess my own identity has made me deeply involved in sort of mental health issues.
Right.
And I've always been open about my mental health, so I guess it stemmed from there.
Yes. So how, as a child, did you realise you suffered with mental health?
Well, I didn't, I guess. It was only subsequent treatment that I had about 12 years ago now that revealed that
Right.
when they looked back at my childhood and asked me how I felt at times during my childhood, they told me, you know, you've obviously been depressed a long time, but it was undiagnosed.
Yes.
And as a child of sort of 10 onwards, you know, you don't know about these sorts of things. You know, it got labelled lots of other things, bereavement, hormonal stuff, growing pains, and all these sorts of stuff. But in actual fact, it was depression.
Yes.
So I guess that's one of the things that I do look at, I suppose, in terms of trying to get people to understand these things, that children too are subject to all the vagaries of mental ill health as much as adults. Of course, why wouldn't that be the case?
Yes, yeah. So when you say depression, has there been any way that you could track back to a particular incident or circumstance that triggered this?
Not really. I guess my depression stems from the circumstances of my upbringing, really, in the sense that I was the eldest of 3 brothers.
Right.
My middle brother, Danny, had Down syndrome. My father had a coronary heart disease. And so a consequence of all these factors meant that I was sort of always thrust into that role of being the strong one, the independent one, and the rock, if you like. And I guess at the time I played that role, but I didn't realise that it was a potentially damaging one. And so from there, really, it obviously came. Nothing tangible, nothing specific, but those sorts of circumstances, you know, led to it.
And that's quite interesting because there are lots of young people nowadays who are carers for whether it's elderly or sick parents or, you know, siblings, or for whatever reason have that responsibility. And I've never really thought about the impact that responsibility might have.
Yes, I mean, I think it's an underplayed thing. I think you're right. I think when lots of attention is paid on carers, young carers as well, who are caring, for example, for their parents, but not so much on people who are caring for their brothers or sisters. And you're right, people get thrust into these sorts of situations without necessarily a deep enough investigation of their own mental health. You know, it's respite in terms of giving people a couple of weeks off is one thing. It deals with certain anxieties and certain feelings and certain things that need to be considered. But does it go far enough? I don't think it does. And I think people need to look at, you know, and hopefully this is happening now, the lives of young people, not just those with caring responsibilities, but with other difficult circumstances in their lives, to sort of say, well, actually, you know, are you getting the right outlet for your feelings, your emotions? You know, are you being treated if there is obviously evident sign of mental distress?
Yes, yeah. So you still managed to, you know, have a life, jobs, those sorts of things. Was that challenging?
Yes.
How so?
there's no doubt that I think living with a mental illness is difficult. Challenging is probably too underplayed a word, right. I would think. But trying, I guess, to maintain the sort of semblance of in inverted commas, normal existence, compounds that difficulties really. And I found it very difficult to, particularly in latter years, to be fully employed. Right. I managed to, but with lots of disability-related sickness absences. Right. And that was one of the contributing factors why I left the county council, to be fair. It was just too demanding on my mental health. But with the right support and a climate that is empathetic, understanding, has that knowledge and so forth, then there's no reason why anybody with a severe mental illness like myself can't do anything. It's been proven before. If Winston Churchill can run the country with depression, then it opens up all sorts of doors to anybody to want to do anything. But the support obviously is key. Yeah.
So what do you think that we should be doing to change people's view of someone with a mental illness?
I think to have an open conversation and to be open about responses and to be able to sort of provide opportunities for people to come out without them fearing the consequences of doing so. Yes. Stigma and discrimination in relation to mental health is still sadly quite rife in this country. And the only way that we're ever going to get beyond that is if people have a more open and receptive mind as to what mental health is and what it isn't. Yes. I think there's too often, particularly with men maybe, there's this sort of notion that people with a mental illness are potentially violent or intent on damage, and the only damage that they're probably liable to do is to themselves in those sorts of respects. So getting rid of some of those misconceptions and sort of blatant stereotypes is a way forward, and it shouldn't be that difficult to do. It just means a little bit more compassion and a little bit more understanding and awareness of what mental health is, because we're all susceptible to it.
Definitely, because things happen in life, don't they?
Of course they do.
So in your advocacy, what are some of the things that you do?
I mean, the basic thing is just to talk about my life, if you like, my battles with mental illness, and to do so in a very open and honest and transparent way. I find that is the best way of people then being receptive to what you're saying and being able to make some sorts of connections. And, it is a challenge being open about things such as self-harm, such as suicide, such as the sort of depths of despair. It's not easy, but I don't find it an onerous task. It's sort of a task because I'm talking about what's in me, and this is as much a part of my identity as the football team I support, for example. So for me, it's not a burdensome thing. It's about freeing people's minds to it, and if people see me, particularly as a man, being able to talk about emotions and feelings, I like to think, and it's certainly been my experience, that people then, open up a little bit themselves, and I think we can then help them to help them sources of help, whether that be clinical help, support group help, community help, what have you. Yeah. So I think my advocacy work, my work in mental health is simply about being open about myself and to talk openly about some of the issues that go with it, so that other people hopefully will take up that mantle as well. Yeah.
Okay. So if we can change the subject slightly, and get back to, because we said you were a lead officer for equality with the Leicestershire County Council. Yes. Tell me about some of the things that you did as lead officer for equality that you sort of enjoyed doing.
Blimey. It was, and obviously still is, because obviously there's people still doing the jobs. It's a very multifarious role, there's multifaceted role. It involves lots and lots of different things. But for me, the liberating thing, the most exciting thing about it is dealing with ordinary people and their trials and tribulations, and looking at ways in which inequality works, because inequality works and is rife again in our society. but trying to sort of break those barriers by encouraging people to be, to be more open, receptive, to give them a little bit of encouragement and empowerment, to be a shoulder to cry on, to be a hand to grasp, to go and address their issues with relevant people.
Yes.
All these sorts of things are quite liberating experiences. And when you look at the sort of breadth of equality and what that means in our society, it encompasses so many different, it encompasses everybody really, because we're all susceptible to inequality and lack of justice, if you like. But I think dealing with communities and people within communities was the best part of the job. Sadly, I think in this climate of sort of cuts within public sector organisations, it's the part of an equality officer's job that is becoming more difficult to sustain because of the demands on people to be, less people doing the job, having to be office-based and those sorts of things. And that was never really me. I was somebody who wanted to be out in communities.
So out there talking to people, talking to groups, getting out there in different sides of our community and things like that.
Yes. And I guess encouraging people, and this is where the mental health came in, I guess. If people saw me as being open about my own mental illness, then that hopefully translated into them being open about some of the problems that they were having in another equality area. And I guess that personal example helps others, to be more receptive to you. And that's certainly what I felt, that I would go out and have meetings with people, not simply because I knew there were issues, but simply because there was a need to talk to people and to listen to people, irrespective of whether there was an issue, a really pertinent, immediate issue at hand. It's getting to know people, really. Isn't it?
So I would say that it seems to me quite amazing, and you seem quite a strong person, to have be an advocate for mental health, which is, a challenging, difficult issue for people and society to be dealing with, but also at the same time dealing with equality issue, which again can be challenging and difficult for some people. So actually to be managing those two things at the same time, for me, shows that you're quite a strong person.
It's one of those things. I think people, anyone with a mental illness will recognise this, that when somebody else's perception doesn't match with one that you have of yourself. I mean, I'm at the moment coming out of not a severe depressive episode, but a substantial one. And if you'd asked me that question a week ago, I'd have sniggered even louder, I think, because I just saw myself as being inherently weak and pathetic in those sorts of ways. So to, you don't always see what other people see in you. But it is important that that's the case, that I think particularly for men, not just about mental health, but other equality issues, to say actually it's something to be strong, it's something to be proud about if you're able to talk about your own weaknesses. It's not a badge of dishonour to talk quite openly about emotions, feelings, where you need help and so forth. So, I guess if that comes across and translates as strength, then that, I hope, then translates into that strength in other people.
Okay. So we have two quick points to talk about. One, I'm going to ask you about inspiration. We'll come back to that at the moment. But what I don't want us not to talk about is your book. Here is a gentleman who has said he suffers with mental health, but you have the tenacity to write a book.
Yes.
How? Tell me about that.
Obviously, it's a book on the Holocaust, and as a Jewish man, the Holocaust is obviously deeply ingrained within my psyche and my background. And I guess over the years, at the County Hall, I'd always run the county's Holocaust Memorial Day events, and I'd produce the addresses and talk to people, lectures and so forth. And so there came a time a couple of years ago when I just thought, right, I've got this existent material, but obviously there's so many other things.
Yes.
I spent a lot of time travelling in Poland, in Germany, in the Czech Republic, and so on. And so putting all those things together, I thought, well, I ought to do something with this knowledge and with this background. So the book has been 2 years plus in writing. It's due out next month. I'm finally going through the sort of the really final draft, to sort of dotting I's and crossing T's and so forth. And hopefully it'll be a book that will be read and that people may learn something and gain something in their lives from it.
Well, we look forward to that. And, you know, congratulations. Again, it's a badge of strength to be able to focus all that information, put it all together and produce something that we can all benefit from. So
thank you.
You're welcome. So inspiration, what is it to you?
Inspiration. I think I find inspiration in so many different ways and in so many different facets of life. You know, it's funny, on the way to the studio, I was listening to Mozart's Magic Flute in the car, and just that, you know, the sort of the uplifting period, or the uplifting essence of listening to somebody that you admire and some of the creativity that goes with it. That's an uplifting and inspirational experience. But then so too is, you know, watching your own children, watching people around you doing everyday things that to lots of people may seem routine and mundane, but actually in actual fact are massive achievements for people. I guess that comes from my quality background and from my own circumstances, but I find inspiration everywhere, and I think if you look for it hard enough, you can see it in virtually every facet of, well, in all facets of life, and you can learn from everything as well.
Yeah. Is there any one person that you would say has been an inspiration to you?
My brother, Danny, who sadly, Danny had Down syndrome, but he sadly passed away some 20 years ago now. But he, living with Down syndrome and living with a Down syndrome person in the 1970s was not easy. You know, this wasn't the sort of more liberated era that fortunately we're in today, although we still need to make improvements. But Danny sort of, he countered every stereotype that there was, you know, that we were told he wouldn't be able to read or write, and yet by 8 years old he was reading and writing. He was told he wouldn't be able to do this, he wouldn't be able to do that, physically he wouldn't be capable, emotionally he wouldn't be capable, but he did, and he brought us all together as a family and others in ways that were simply almost miraculous. And so when I look at Danny and what he managed to achieve in only 25 years of living, I look back and think, well, blimey, there's an inspiration there for me to carry on his memory by doing what I can as well. Yeah,
okay, that's inspiring. Thank you. Thanks for sharing. Well, Julian Harrison, thank you so much for joining us.
You're very welcome.
In Inspiring You. Thank you also for your journey and for showing us that it doesn't matter what you're struggling with in life, you can actually work with that, sometimes work through it, and do things that will make a difference to other people. So thank you so much for doing that.
Thanks for having me, Sandra.
It's been an absolutely pleasure having you here.
Thank you.
And thank you, viewers, for listening and watching, and we look forward to seeing you again next time on Inspiring You. Sandra Pollock saying bye for now. Bye-bye.